You know, one of the guys I really like, he's a real conservative, and he carries the Reagan name the way, if I were related to him, I'd want the Reagan name to be carried. It's Michael Reagan. How are you, my brother?
I'm good, friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. First, let's get the mess out of the way here. You've got Ron Jr., as I read on the air last Friday, basically saying that your dad had Alzheimer's, or the beginnings of it, while he was president in his second term, which is an outrageous smear. I worked with your dad. I worked in the administration. But you go ahead and address that.
Well, I mean, I was flying a plane and got off the plane and heard the statement from him out of his book, excerpt that was put out by his publisher. That, in fact, Ron believed that our father had Alzheimer's while he was president of the United States. And had he been diagnosed in 1987 that he had Alzheimer's, my father would have just graciously stepped down as president of the United States of America. And I just was absolutely outraged by that, because it's, you know, I serve as the chairman of the John Douglas French Alzheimer's Foundation. I deal with this all the time. I don't play doctor. And, you know, you and I are aware there are people on the left, Bill Maher being one of them, who for years has tried to sell that Ronald Reagan, in fact, did have Alzheimer's disease, and have used that, you know, as basically a hammer to hammer my father's administration. And for one of his sons to come out in the book and address that he believed our father had it, to me just was outrageous, when there was absolutely no proof, no anything to back up his position. And so I came out very strongly and stated what I stated, that I thought he was, you know, his dad, he was an embarrassment to his father, and his dad was president, and he was an embarrassment to his mother now. And, you know, I'm glad I did that, because now I see in the latest Drudge Report the fact that Ron has finally backed off of it and said he possibly made a mistake. Well, he made a huge mistake, and the publisher made a huge mistake by using that to try, in my way, they used Ron to try and sell a book. And Ron allowed himself to be in that position.
This is what I don't understand. Surely he had to know that this is what would be seized on. You know, he had to approve the excerpts that were being pushed out. He knew who he was trying to appeal to. And really, to trash your own father, and then on top of that, at this centennial celebration that the library's putting together, people celebrating his life and his works and everything else, to put out this book, the timing couldn't have been worse. He had to know what the hell he was doing, Mike. He's not an idiot.
Oh, yeah, I think he absolutely did, you know what he was in fact doing. And the publisher probably thought, wow, this is really great. This is going to be a great hook for the book. You know, one of his sons believes he had Alzheimer's. And you look what Ronald Reagan accomplished in the last 4 years of the presidency. It was unbelievable what he was able to accomplish. You know, the Brandenburg Gate speech, the START treaties, Reykjavik, all the way through the system. He had such a phenomenal second half of his presidency, you know, if you will. And that's why there was no evidence out there to support, you know, Ron's position. And what's interesting is that maybe this is the difference between liberals and conservatives. I have like 23 pages in the back of my book to support the positions I take in the book. Liberals seem to never have any pages to support their positions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way they feel.
Well, let me mention the name of the book.
Well, he felt that, in fact, it was going on, therefore it was.
Well, and we have doctor after doctor, doctors who treated him, doctors who knew him, doctors who were with him. Every damn one of them said no.
Yeah, and you would think that with the statement that he's making now, that he had this inkling that it's not like there was nobody he could go to and speak to and converse with to get some real information. I mean, as I said, I sit as the chairman of the John Douglas French Alzheimer's Foundation. Formerly, you know, the Art Linkletter was the chair of it, and he passed away, and so I am now the honorary chair. I've been on the board for years. There wasn't like, you know, people weren't hiding. They were there if you wanted to ask them a question.
Now, your book, the book I want to talk about, The New Reagan Revolution, how long have you been at this book?
Oh, listen, I've been at this book probably a lifetime because I lived this book from the beginning to the end. But this book I've been working on for well over a year, and I think I probably, came together in my mind what I wanted to do, because I started thinking about, with all the books about my father, nobody had written a book based on the 1976 speech my father gave at the convention where he lost.
By the way, do you know I'm probably the only one that ever plays that speech on the air?
Is that right? Great speech, wasn't it?
Great speech. Yeah.
But again, nobody's ever written a book and torn that speech apart and said, okay, that's where we were then. Where are we now and where are we going? And if you remember in the speech, he talks about being asked to write a letter, to be put into a time capsule to be read by the people who live on the 300th anniversary of the United States of America. And they said, gosh, what a daunting task to write for a group of people who would know everything about us, but we would know nothing of them. And he thought, do I write about the freedoms we enjoy today, knowing that if we don't make the right decisions today, they may not even have the freedom to open the time capsule to read what, in fact, I've written in that time capsule? I thought to myself, wow, you really look at what's going on in the world today. Look at the freedoms you talk about all the time. The freedoms that we are losing every single day. We are a third of the way into that letter, a third of the way. And I'm fearful that, in fact, if we don't turn it around, people may never read that letter.
Yeah, and I'm even more fearful today, because in this environment now, you're not even, it's not that you're not allowed. You can say the things that your father said, even the way that he said it, using his exact words. And now it's suggested that it's uncivil, and now we have David Gregory talking about violent rhetoric. I mean, I've played your dad's speech on the air, which he gave on behalf of Barry Goldwater, talking about socialism and statists and all the rest of it. I mean, I can only imagine what they would have said about him if he gave that speech.
Oh,
today.
But they were saying about that. They were saying that then. People forget. I mean, Ronald Reagan, as I say in the book, was basically the original Tea Party.
Hit that. I want you to expand on that, because I wanted to get into that with you.
Well, he really was the original Tea Party, in this era, because he was the person who was the outcast of the Republican Party. He was the grassroots guy. He was the Tea Party. He wasn't liked by the hierarchy in Washington, D.C., of the Republican Party. He was ridiculed by the Rockefellers. And we know there's the Rockefeller Republican side of the party, and there's the Reagan Republican side of the party. And the difference is one group are elitists, and the other ones are grassroots. And Ronald Reagan understood the grassroots and from whence he came. And that's how he became president of the United States. He truly was change in Washington, D.C. I get called all the time. People say, well, what would your father think of the Tea Party? I said, he would have been a member of the Tea Party at the time, because he was the Tea Party. He was the outcast. And when he ran for president in 1980, Mark, he pulled the family together, and I tell this story in the book. And we're sitting in the room, and he walks into the room, and he says to us, I just came home from Georgia, and Georgia was no different than Omaha and all the other cities I go to speak. When I get off the plane, the baggage handler said, you've got to run again, Mr. President. When I get to the hotel, the bellman says, Governor, you've got to run again. When I get to my hotel room, the chambermaid leaves notes under my pillow, Governor, you've got to run again. And he says, this happens everywhere I go. And so I've decided I'm going to run again for the presidency. And Maureen and I and Colleen go out for a cocktail afterwards for a glass of wine, and Maureen raises her glass. And she says, boy, if he doesn't make it this time, we'll run him for the president of the bellhop and chambermaids labor union. But again,
you really miss her, don't you?
Oh, Myrm was great. Myrm was great. When Maureen was dying, and I tell this story, Maureen was dying of melanoma. And in 2001, she was at St. John's, and she said, everybody out of the room, and I started to leave with everybody else in the room. I thought she was tired. And as I got to the door, she says, not you. Now, you knew Myrm. Mm-hmm. So you know what I'm talking about, which is not you. Mm-hmm. And I stopped, and I looked at her, and she says, I didn't say you. I said, you said everybody out of the room. I didn't say you. Close and lock the door. So I closed and locked the door. And we talked about Mom. We talked about Dad. We talked about Nancy. We talked about everything. And she said, you know something? I'm not going to be here much longer. I'm dying of this terrible disease. Our father has a wonderful legacy. And we cannot allow for the other two to carry it. You've got to pick up the mantle. And, Mark, that's one of the reasons I left radio in 2009. It just got to a point where I said, you know something, I've got to follow through with a promise I made to my sister. There's enough people doing talk radio today. You know what I'm doing with the foundation and things of that nature. And it really hit me this week that if I'm not there to make a statement, then Ron carries the legacy, that legacy. And what does it become? I mean, I love Ron to death and so on and so forth, but we're not on the same page, and he wasn't on the same page with his father.
You know, Mike, that's a really touching story. I'm going to tell you something. Ron Jr. owes the whole country an apology. There are people out there who adore Ronald Reagan, people out there who worked for him, people out there who campaigned for him, people out there who are now free as a result of his policies. And to just put together this smear and put it between pages and have the publisher push it out and all the libs going nuts, it's just, I think he owes the country an apology. I don't care about the left wing. They don't amount to anything to me. Now, listen, can you hold on? Because I want to hold you over here.
Absolutely.
It's the great Michael Reagan, my dear friend. He's got a brand new book out. It is a terrific book, which is why I wrote a blurb for it. The New Reagan Revolution. The New Reagan Revolution. I cannot endorse it strongly enough, which means you ought to go get it now, Amazon.com and other places. And we link to it on my social sites on MarkLevinShow.com. And it is the 100th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's birth, coming up in just a couple of weeks. We're going to have a magnificent celebration at the Reagan Library, and this book is the book you ought to get. Guest is Michael Reagan. He's got a great new book out, which is entitled The New Reagan Revolution. We're linking to it on the social sites, on our website. Mike, you write in here about the banner of bold colors, and that was part of a phrase your dad used in several speeches, and as he was taking on the Republican establishment time and time and time again. What do you mean by that?
You know, we have to really define who we are. I don't think there's a person on the planet that can go out there and walk down the street and say, who are the Republicans? What do they stand for? You really don't know. I mean, yeah, we stand against Barack Obama, and let's be honest, the reason we won the last election is because of Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, and Barack Obama. The reason we lost the election before that was because we didn't have bold colors. Nobody knew what we stood for, and we acted like we were the other party. Nobody knows who we are, and if we really want to move ahead and go forward, people have to know who we are. What are we? What do we stand for? What are we going to do? If we have to regain the trust of this country, which we certainly have to do now that we've been given the reins, we have to say this is what we stand for. This is who we are. And this is where we want to take the country. And I think today in America, and I think you'll agree with this, you know, if you listen to my father's speeches and you play them on the air, here's a man who spoke in parables. He told you a story. You really understood where he was going, and he drew you in. Today we have too many politicians that speak in sound bites. It's all about sound bites. Well, my sound bite be heard on the 6 o'clock news. But what is the depth? What is the meat around that sound bite? And that's what we're missing. We have a lot of people who want to be president of the United States, but how do you vote for somebody who just speaks in sound bites? Ronald Reagan would walk into a room and own the room. He'd say hello to everybody in the room. He'd shake their hand, make sure he's had eye contact with them. Today, it's like the politicians on our side, you know, show up, you know, give their talk, give their sound bites, and leave. And they don't really take on and invite people in, if you will. Ronald Reagan invited people in.
All right, we're gonna take a little break here. We're gonna come back in our final segment with Michael Reagan, and the book is The New Reagan Revolution. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you, Michael, well, who do you see on the horizon? Not the next Ronald Reagan, but who might be that type of, you know, bold candidate? We'll be right back. Michael Reagan, the book is The New Reagan Revolution. You should get it now, just in time for the centennial celebration of Ronald Reagan's birth. You won't find all this scandal stuff in this book, but you will learn a lot of interesting behind-the-scenes facts, both in the campaigns and related to the family. There's a lot of positive in this book, and a lot that we can learn from this book. So who do you think, I'm not telling you to endorse somebody yet, who do you think are among the bold politicians out there right now, or are there any?
You know, it's interesting when you look at everybody out there. It's a train wreck going to happen there in Iowa with everybody aligning themselves. You know, it's going to have to be somebody who really... I'm not looking for the person that's Reagan-esque. I think we make a mistake by doing that.
Yeah.
I think we're looking for leaders.
Yeah.
And we haven't found one.
Mm-hmm.
And so we look at talk radio, we look at all these other areas, and it's because we haven't found that leader. Because you have too many people speaking in sound bites.
Do you think the process will find a leader through this process?
Hopefully in a process, but I think they do a disservice by. I get a little tired of everybody mentioning Ronald Reagan because none of them measure up. We weren't looking for Abraham Lincoln when we found Ronald Reagan. You know, we're looking for somebody to lead, and we need somebody who's going to step up and say, "Follow me. I'm going to lead. This is where we're going to go, and it's going to be about us." We in the family, I talk about this in the book, we felt that Ronald Reagan running for president was like the kid going for his Eagle Scout badge.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he was like. And you knew him. You worked with him.
Mm-hmm.
It was never about him. And so these are the stories I tell in the book. And what I try to do in the book is say, listen, everybody talks about what Ronald Reagan would do. Here's what he did. When faced with the same issues, this is what he did.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we do have a man who self-identifies with Reagan, and more than that, with FDR and Abraham Lincoln, and that's Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Be careful.
You know, it's interesting. At least he's reading books about Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, so they say, but he used to read books by other people, you know. Mike Reagan,
exactly
God bless you, Mike.
That's all in the book also.
All right. Well, I hope to see you soon, okay? Next time you're in this area, I'll buy you dinner.
You got it.
All right, brother. Don't be careful out there. Mike Reagan, The New Reagan Revolution.